All right, so today we're doing pivot tables. University crime data, so download this. It's the same data, it's similar data to what we worked with last time. Last time, when we were working with, built-in dialogues, we had some data files to work with. They were terrible for analysis, right? They were like presented as a table of information. You couldn't have built a pivot table on it or whatever. Today, the data that we're working with is that same data, but organized differently. In fact, the whole database project is to get from those raw files that we worked with last time we were together to data in this format. But not just reading them into Excel, it's reading them into a database in this format. This really is just data exported from a database. So let's take a look at the data that we have here, and this will be the basis for our pivot tables that we're working with today. So each line, then, that we have is information about one number. So here, this number, 5,128. All the rest of these columns over here just give context to that number. It's an enrollment number. Oh, so that's how many students were enrolled. Where? Well, at the university, or Auburn University, on the Montgomery campus. This next, we look down a few lines, there's an 8. What is this 8? That's the amount of larceny that happened on the Montgomery campus of Auburn University. And larceny is a crime. Enrollment's not a crime. Enrollment's just information. And so this column E here is just to be able to allow us to separate out enrollment figures from the crime numbers. We'd like to be able to say, well, what's the total number of reported incidents of crime without having that kind of conflated with the enrollment. What state is that school in and what year is that report number for? And this is really the way that you want data organized for if you're doing pivot table analysis. You want, not a whole lot of numbers. You could have numbers that they apply to that same context, but you want lots of ways to think about. How do I want to think about that? Lots of different labels, or what we refer to as dimensions, to think about that, to think about those numbers. All right, so pivot tables. It turns out that before Excel had pivot tables, Excel was really good for doing modeling, not so good for doing data analysis. We could do some stuff with data analysis, and they give us some tools that would let us do running sums and subtotals and such. But it wasn't until we got pivot tables built into Excel that it was like, oh yeah, we can really look at data well now, right inside of Excel. Lots of data, not just for number crunching spreadsheets, but for doing data analysis. How many of you say, you know what, pivot tables, totally got them down? Pivot tables I'm good with. Who are you going, I think I've seen a pivot table, but I'm not quite sure I could make one that made any sense. A few of you in that case. So let's start off just by building a pivot table. We can kind of take a look at it, see how it works. Then we're going to record ourselves building a pivot table. And then we're going to look at the code. It turns out the code the macro recorder makes for pivot tables is not very good code. In fact, it won't even run. Like you record it and then say, I want to run this code, it won't run again. So we'll see the kind of modification that we have to do to get going. It gets us going in the right direction, but it's going to need some help. All right. Well, first of all, to me, it always seemed like pivot tables were a more advanced topic. Remember, did I tell you this? The very first time I ever tried to do a pivot table, there was some hype about it. I was reading a PC magazine. There used to be a magazine called PC Magazine. You buy a magazine talking about personal computers. And they're talking about this new great feature in Excel, pivot tables. And at the time, I was a corporate trainer, and I worked for a company that sent me to different companies to teach them how to do stuff in Excel and other places. And so I'm reading about, this pivot table. Wow, this really, I don't know what a pivot table is, but it sounds like it's, really important, and so I better get in and look at it. So I finally found out how to make a pivot table. Let's just do it really quick. Here's where you go to find pivot tables. Insert, it's the very first thing on pivot table. In fact, the first time I was looking for pivot tables under Excel 2007, which is when we got this whole ribbon thing going on here, I must have looked for a half hour to figure out where pivot tables were. I could have Googled it pretty quickly, but it was kind of a point of honor that I could find it. I didn't go to Google. And because it seemed like an advanced thing, I thought it's got to be over here somewhere on the right. I'm looking over here in great detail, on all these tabs. There were formulas, whatever. But it was like the very first thing. That seems like it should be something simple. It should be over here on the left. It's not pivot tables. Okay. We build a pivot table. I click on Insert Pivot Table, that first choice. And then it says Select a Range. If I only had one cell selected, it will pop out to the set of contiguous data. That's good. Where do you want to put it? I'm going to put it onto a new worksheet. That's fine. So all the defaults here are okay. I got to right here, and in fact, in the day, this part didn't pop up. All I had was this. I looked at that, and I right-clicked it. Didn't do very much. I'm kind of looking around and going, well, I admit it's kind of nice looking, but I don't really see the real value. The whole purpose behind a pivot table is to allow us to summarize data across multiple dimensions simultaneously. That's what it's for. We don't have to give it dimensions. We can just summarize data. Here's how we would do it. I would take this value right here. That's my number column. It's called value. The label on that is value. The column header is value. And I'm going to drag that down to my values. Down here, it has a little sigma, right? It's got capital sigma here, which just means summation. We're doing some kind of calculation. And so I'm going to bring that down, and it's going to go, great. You want to summarize that vector of data. It's going to guess at sum. I have other options here. I could make it average, or the standard deviation, or the median, or whatever. We'll leave it as sum, that's fine. And there it is, it summarized all that data. What does that number mean? First of all, where did that number come from? How's that number calculated? Yeah, it's just the sum of column G. What does that number mean? It doesn't mean anything. Yeah, I mean, it's like we take all the enrollment across multiple years, add up all the instances of crime, chuck them all into one number, and go, here you go, 3.08 million, or whatever that is. Yeah, that's what it is. No, 30. Yeah, 3 million. 3 million what? I don't know. Things. Crimes, students, enrollments. So we want to give some context to that. Don't just summarize the whole thing, but summarize it according to some category. First category I want to put on it, let's summarize it according to label. So label is the description. It's this next column over. Column F. Now it's going to be a little bit more meaningful. Let me see if I can get back to where I want to be. So I'm going to bring label, and I'm going to make that a column. I could make it a row header, but I'm going to make it a column header. I'm going to drag it over here into columns. Now I've got some number that actually makes sense. Tell me what this number means. 1706. No, actually, it's the 99th anniversary of the landing of Plymouth Colony. No, of Jamestown Colony. Coincidental. No, it is the number of arsons in the data set. This is the number of instances of arson in this data set. Number of assault. How about this one right here? Enrollment. What does that number mean? It is not the number of students in the data set, nor is it the number of students enrolled. Why not? Let's kind of have to think about these numbers. What do they mean? Let's look over here at just one of these raw numbers. Tell me what that number means. I think you're on the right track if you give me the same answer you got before. This number is this one right here. Somebody. Number of students enrolled at the Montgomery campus of Auburn University in 2006. If I go look at the same one for 2007, it'll be a similar number, but what's going to be the problem with calling those the number of students? A lot of them are going to be repeat students. So it's always kind of important to give some thought to this data and what does that data mean, because if we look at this and say, aha, that's how many students we had, that's how many enrollments we have. And so enrollment is a student at a university at a year. That's what enrollment is. Okay. So that's nice. I have summarized this according to its label, but I want to summarize it according to something else simultaneously. So let's bring in the state. I'll bring in the state as a row filter. So now, as I look at this number right here, that is the total number of assaults in our database that occurred in the state of Alabama. Now, can I tell anything about which school they applied it that they were in? Well, I can tell them they were, in the set of schools that are in Alabama. I don't know which ones. To do that, I'm going to bring the school in and drop it below the state. So it'll still be a row. So now I've still got my summary. I should have. Well, here's the Alabama total right here. 76. That same 76. And now it's split out by school, and I can go ahead and split it out by campus as well, even deeper. I'll drag campus down below school, and now when I have a campus, that shows up. But a bunch of my schools don't seem to have campuses, which makes this look a little bit ugly. So here's the University of Montebello, and here's the University of Montebello total. That's no good. So let's do this. What I want to do is I want to collapse this one. So I might want to take a peek in here occasionally, but I don't want to show it all the time, so I'll collapse it. I'm going to right-click this, come to expand. I'm going to right-click right on the word Birmingham. So I'm kind of up here at the top. I've got Birmingham showing. I'm going to right-click Birmingham, expand and collapse. Now, if I just collapse it, it's going to say, okay, this one right here, where I'm under Alabama, collapse that one down. I don't want to see the detail for that one, but what I can say is collapse entire field. And now we're saying not just Birmingham, but all of the campuses, collapse those away. I don't want to look at them. So now I'm back to where I was only moments ago. I'm down to the university level, but I can drill into the University of Alabama by clicking on the little plus sign, and then it brings those out for me to inspect. Collapse them, whatever. So it gives me the ability to drill in. In fact, it may be that I want to start off by looking at the state level. Now let's suppose that this analysis that we're doing is actually for the University of Alabama. We're at the University of Alabama, and that's going to be the interesting part to us. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave the campuses for the University of Alabama expanded. And I'm going to come up, right-click on University of Alabama, right-click this one, and say expand, collapse entire field. I'm going to collapse away the universities, but I'm leaving the campus for Alabama expanded. Watch what happens. That's not what I expected to happen. Let me expand this one. I need to go up a level. Expand. Oh yeah, I want to come to state. Come to state, and I want to collapse state. Expand, collapse entire field. Okay, so now our states are collapsed, but remember, I still have the University of Alabama expanded, even though the state's collapsed, so I can't even see Alabama. That one's still expanded. So when I expand the state of Alabama, then I can see all the campuses, but this one was already expanded. So I can kind of put individual ones of those on, even though they're collapsed down to a lower level. Does that make sense? Or higher level. All right, so that's really kind of nice. This makes the tool pretty nice for folks to be able to explore, looking at the numbers. Non-technical person can come and say, yeah, that's a plus sign. I can click on that, and it doesn't take them long to understand how to use a pivot table. We have two more columns that we haven't dealt with here. Let's make those report filters, or page filters. I'm going to bring the report year on as a filter. And so now we can select that particular year, or look at all years. And I'm also going to bring type on as a filter below the report year. So now, if all I'm interested in is enrollments, then I can bring this down to my information because that's only the enrollments number. So now I can see enrollments here. Or I could say, you know what, I just want to see crimes. I'm not really care about enrollments right now, I just want to see crimes, but I can set that up that way as well. And perhaps I will set this to 2000. So now we can see how things went in 2010. Tuscaloosa looks like they had 113 burglaries in 2010. And the grand total of crimes reported 471. Okay. Questions just on pivot tables in general? It turns out that pivot tables is one of those things in Excel. You've got Excel written down here on your resume. I'm an Excel expert. When you go up to that interview, one of the things that many recruiters will do is they will say, okay, I see you're pretty comfortable with Excel. Tell me a little bit about pivot tables. Why might you use a pivot table? What experience do you have with pivot tables? If you kind of look back like pivot what? I'm quite sure I've heard about that. And they go, okay, Excel beginner. Pivot tables is kind of one of those things where they say, you've got pivot tables, all right. You've gotten pretty deep into Excel if you're comfortable with pivot tables. All right. Let's record ourselves building this same pivot table. So I want it collapsed all the way down. So expand, collapse. So we've been through it once. Now let's record ourselves building that same pivot table. I'm going to come back to my data sheet and developer record. Developer record macro. Macro 1. I think I'm going to call it build pivot table. Shortcut key, no shortcut key, and nothing else. That's fine. We'll start recording. All right, ready to go through that same process? So we'll go through that same process now, all of you together, because you'll need this code to be the basis of what we're going to build. So insert tab, pivot table, accept all the defaults. Value goes as a value. Label goes as a column. I'm going to make sure I put these in order for the row. I'm going to put state first, then school, below state, and then campus. I'm going to collapse all of the campuses. I'm going to right-click on Birmingham underneath my University of Alabama. Expand collapse and collapse entire field. And then I'm going to go ahead and expand just University of Alabama. And then I'm going to collapse the state. The whole entire field for the state. So now we're collapsed back down to state, but once we open up the state, we'll already have University of Alabama opened up. I'm going to bring the report year as a page filter, a report filter. The type as a filter. I'm going to set the type to crime, so up here, type will be crimes. I'm only looking at my crimes. And the report year I'll set to 2006. All right. And we're going to pause the recording there to make sure that everyone's up to speed, then we'll continue. All right, we'll go ahead and stop recording, and then we'll take a look at the code. Folks, when you go look at this code, you will understand why we did not introduce pivot tables on day one, because this code is hideous. This is the kind of code that would like to drop a whole half a section. So, but a little bit of talking through, we're going to see it, we're going to go, okay, yeah, we can understand this code. I'm hoping now that you're at the point where you can say, all right, we can work through this. But it should look a little bit frightening. Alt F11, bring up my code window. That's not even it. Let's go to, make sure we're on here, pivot table project, or crime, I think it's called University Crime Data. Open up the modules, come to module. Okay, so here's build pivot table. First thing that happens is sheets.add. All right, sheets.add. You had a worksheet. That was pretty easy. This next one is truly hideous. I'm going to cut it apart. We're going to talk. Active workbook. I'm hoping you can look at that and go, I get it. It's a reference to the workbook object. It happens to be active. So far, so good. Worksheets, a particular worksheet. So far, I mean, we're okay to here. Now, do you see the first problem this code is going to have if I try to run it again? Why is sheet 1? What is sheet 1? Why sheet 1?
It's going to be a double day.
Sheet 1 because I just added a sheet which happened to be named sheet 1. And so if I don't do something a little more sophisticated with the sheet name, when I try to run this again, I'm in trouble because I'm going to make a new sheet to put the pivot tables on, and then I'm going to refer to something on sheet 1, which is not where I want these to go. So we'll get to that point. In fact, why don't we go ahead and handle that? Let's handle that right now. So let's go ahead and I'm going to get rid of these comments. They're fairly meaningless here. Let's declare a variable dim s as a worksheet. Now, we've got sheets.add. Sheets.add adds a sheet, makes it the active sheet. But what does it do? It does something else neat. It doesn't just add the sheet. It adds the sheet, and it returns what? It returns a reference to the sheet it just created. So I can capture that reference so that I can know the sheet that I'm working with, even if I don't know what the name is. How do I do that? I'll give you a hint. It's right here, and it starts with S. Set S equal to sheets.add. So now we've added a new sheet, and now we've got a reference to that sheet. Well, that's all this is. This is, right up to here, it's a reference to that sheet. We're going to simplify this data. Are you ready? S. So we've now reduced that line. Instead of active sheet, sheet 1, we just said S, which will be, importantly, it will be the sheet that we want it to be. Not sheet 1, but the sheet we just created. Now, pivot tables. Oh, darn it. We created the pivot table. I was hoping to see the pivot cache. We don't have the statement that creates the pivot cache. Oh, curse me for taking you through that first before we recorded it. This is what it's saying. It's saying, all right, s.pivot tables. There's a pivot table on that sheet. It's a collection of all the pivot tables on that sheet. What's the pivot table? It's called pivot table 1. It's getting to a particular pivot table, and then it's saying, hey, there's a pivot cache associated with that pivot table. We want to do something with that pivot cache. It's finding an existing pivot cache, and it's building on it. Now, what's the problem? If that pivot cache or that pivot table gets created, the pivot cache will be gone. And so when I say try to find that pivot cache, we're sunk. The rest of this code is going to be okay, but we've got to get the statement that generates this. So rather than have you try to record that through, I'm going to record it to get the code. I'll have you type it. It's just going to be one line. All right? Stand by. To do that, I'm going to have to get rid of all the pivot tables in my workbook. This will delete the pivot, all the pivot caches as well. So the pivot cache, there's two main objects we're working with, a pivot cache and a pivot table. We've got to understand how they articulate with each other. What's that?
That's a pivot cache.
We'll get once I get the code here, we'll talk about it. All right, so I'm going to record this again, then we'll get the code. Don't record with me, just stand by. Call it method 2. I am going to insert pivot table. That's a great pivot table. That should be enough. Well, let me put one thing in just in case. That should be enough. All right, let's take a look at that. There we go. Okay. I'm going to have you type this in. The code isn't executing yet, but at least just type this far. Type this far. See this first line typed in. ActiveWorkbook.pivotcaches.create. This is going to create a pivot cache. A pivot cache. C-A-C-H-E. It's not money. It's not giving you money. It's not currency. It's a cache. It's a storage place. It's saying, listen, somewhere between the source data and the data that we display, we want to hold the data in a format that we can manipulate it very well. That intermediate location is called a pivot cache. And so that's what we want to build. We want to build a pivot cache. We need to build a pivot cache. What happened in the code we recorded before was it said, hey, there's already a pivot cache out there. Let's just use the pivot cache. Find the pivot cache associated with a particular pivot table. No. We've got to be able to start without there being any pivot cache around. We've got to start by creating a pivot cache. And so there's a collection of these caches as a part of the workbook, and we are going to create a new member of that collection.
How much of it do we copy?
Just the first line so far. We're going to change this part. So that first line copy. Okay. So I'm just going to go down and peek down at the code that it recorded. This first line is the one that's we're recording a new pivot table. Here's the part that I copied up for you to work with. So here's what happens is that this pivot table gets created. I'm sorry, the pivot cache gets created. It's the intermediate object. It's the one that holds the data that we can use to attach a pivot table to. It looks at the source. In this case, the source is data sitting in Excel. The source could be somewhere else. It could be a database somewhere. It could be like a web feed. What's it called? A web service feed. It could be data that we're pulling down from the internet as the source. We have to put it into this common format, a pivot cache, that the pivot table knows how to be built on. But look at what it's done here. This is what I just recorded. Up to this point, it's called the create method of the pivot caches. It has these parentheses, so it sends the arguments down there. And then after that, it says dot create pivot table. This is really strange code. What is it doing here? How is it that we can call a method, and then after that method, we can say dot call some other method? What must that first method be doing? Yeah, it creates an object, and then it returns a reference to that object. And so the code, this code right up to here, this evaluates to an object. What object is it? It's a newly created pivot cache. And that newly created pivot cache has a method called create pivot table. It's the same create pivot table that we had up here. Right? Here's that create pivot table saying pivot cache dot create pivot table. It's the same one down there. So we'll work from here as we move forward. But rather than trying to have that as one long line, I want to have a separate object for the pivot cache than for the pivot table itself. So let's create a couple of more object variables. We're going to declare one, dim PC. It's not politically correct or personal computer. It's pivot cache as a pivot cache. And let's dim PT as a pivot table. Here we are calling the create method of the pivot cache's object. What is this? What kind of object is this method going to return? A pivot cache. So we want to capture the reference to that newly created pivot cache. So set PC equal to that newly created pivot cache. Now, do you see the problem with this right here? What's the problem with having this part hard-coded? Yeah, I'm expecting at some point to add another year of data. In fact, that's what your database project is supposed to do. You're supposed to take all those raw files and add another year of data onto the data. And so we don't want to. We want to be whatever the contiguous range is. Now, here's a little trick. The name of this worksheet is crime data. If I look on the tab, I'll see that's the name of that worksheet. But remember that worksheets can have two names. What's the other name? It's called the code name. It's the name I can refer to this worksheet through by code. It's right here. So crime data is on the label, but the name of the object itself is data. So, stick with me on this one, folks. This is a little bit weird. This right now is a string argument. It's just passing a string. Same way I would refer to that range in a formula. Right? Well, it's the R1C1. I think that works in a formula too, but it's a little unusual notation. It turns out that when I'm creating a pivot table, I can pass this argument either as a string and it will figure out the reference, or I can actually pass it as a reference to a range. I can actually give it the range object that attaches that. And that's actually going to be easier because I can refer to this sheet just with the word data. Here it is, data. So I'm going to get rid of this string argument and say data dot range A1. That refers to the upper left-hand corner. Dot, how do I refer to the whole range of contiguous cells? Current region. So this just says, hey, look at the sheet with the code name of data, go to the upper left-hand corner, and refer to the whole set of contiguous data. It won't matter if I add rows, take away rows, it'll get that block of data. And that is going to be our source data. Of course, this space underscore is just a line continuation character. You can put this all in one line if you wanted. It doesn't fit on my screen, so I won't. And then version 6.
What is that?
Version 6 is kind of like the version of the pivot cache creating engine. It seemed like in 2010 it was like version 15, maybe 14. In 2013 it was version 16. Why we've gone backwards to version 6, I'm not sure. But it's going to create a pivot cache all the same.
So did you explain what a pivot cache was?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, that's okay, I'm saying it again. Because it's kind of a strange idea. So the data for a pivot table can come from lots of different places. It could be in a page on an Excel workbook. It could be from a database. It could come from a web feed, like a web service. It could be from a flat file. Lots of places it can come from. And so what a pivot cache is it's like an intermediate stage for the data. It says, let's bring this data into a location that we've got it in a form that it can be manipulated quickly. If we decide, you know what, we want to add a new column, we don't want to have to make a call to a database somewhere to find out the information about that column. Instead, bring this data to where I can work with it. That's what the pivot cache is. That's the only data source that a pivot table knows how to work with. Pivot cache can work with lots of different data sources, but a pivot table says, no. You give me a properly formed pivot cache, and then I can build a table on top of it. So it's this intermediate holding space for the data. In fact, it's saying, hey, this is going to be an Excel database. It's going to be data sitting in Excel. It's not a flat file sitting somewhere on the disk. It's right here in Excel. Tell us where the source is in the version. Okay. So now that is going to give us the pivot cache object. Question?
In the reading, it said that version wasn't necessary. You just want to eliminate it.
Oh, that's a good question. Apparently, someone's done the reading, which is more than I've done. So You might be able to just get rid of version altogether. And presumably it'll just default to whatever version you've got in Excel. Yeah, I like that better. Tell me about these parentheses. They have to be here. Why do they have to be here? Say it again.
Because you want to retrieve the information to it. So.
That's right. This method, it's not just because it's a method that's returning something. And I'm going to do something with what it returned. I am going to capture the return value of what this thing does. It's the reason that down here where I created it from scratch, what am I doing with the return value of this call? This thing evaluates to an object, and I'm doing something with it. What am I doing? I'm calling a method of that object that was here. That's why it has to be in parentheses. And so we've got the parentheses on there. All right, so we've now built the pivot cache. Now let's build the pivot table. Set PT equal to, and now let's just look at this line that we have here. So here's the line that we had recorded before, the one we changed to say s.pivottables. So what this line is saying here is it's saying, hey, we're referring to a particular worksheet, the collection of pivot tables on that worksheet, a pivot table named pivot table 1, and we want to get to its pivot cache. Do you see how everything right up to this point refers to a pivot cache? Which pivot cache it is? Whatever pivot cache is attached to that pivot table on this sheet. Well, we just created a pivot cache. That's the pivot cache that we want to build the pivot table on. We named our pivot cache PC, and so when we call create pivot table, we're going to call it, we're going to replace this reference to the pivot cache right up here with PC. Our pivot cache dot, and there really is no reason to extend this line now. I'm going to bring this one up. PC.create pivot table. We are calling the create pivot table of the pivot cache. Pivot cache knows how to make a pivot table. We're telling it to make a pivot table.
Can you tell me the s.pc dot?
No, because PC is set right here now. And the pivot cache itself is not part of the sheet. Pivot cache is, it's part of the workbook itself. So active workbook pivot caches. The pivot caches collection is an object of the workbook, not of the sheet. Okay, we collected the reference to the pivot cache. We'd like to collect the reference to the pivot table that gets created here. So I'm going to bring that up here on the set PT. So we're going to set PT equal to the pivot table that gets created here. Now once again, I'm doing something with the return value of this method. So what do I have to do? Got to put parentheses around the argument list. Now, there's a couple of things here. This name, the table name, that's going to be a problem. If I leave that as pivot table 2, each time I run this code, it's going to create pivot table 2. But what do you suppose is going to happen if I don't tell it which pivot table, what to name the pivot table? It's going to give it a name. It's got to have some name. We figure out a pretty good name for it. We'll bring that up. Same thing here. Default version. Probably don't need that either. I'll get rid of default version. That leaves us only with having to tell it where it goes. What's the problem here? Yeah, sheet 2, not going to be sheet 2. How do I get to the sheet that I want? S. So, in fact, I can get to that whole range. This is row 3, column 1. I normally would say that. A3. Let's just do it this way. S dot range A3. And again, that started off as a string argument, but in this case, it's happy to accept a range argument as well. That was pretty painful. Now that we're here, it's not too bad. Let's take a look at what we're saying. We're saying, listen, we've got to have some variables here to keep track of some objects that we're working with. One is going to be a worksheet. Make a brand new worksheet. Let's keep track of it. 2, let's create a pivot cache. And let's keep track of it. 3, we'll use that pivot cache to create a pivot table. And let's keep track of it. We've created 3 new objects here. A sheet, a pivot cache, and a pivot table. So far, so good? Let's just survey the rest of the code here and see that this is pretty verbose and it's pretty ugly. We're going to make this look dramatically better. It will feel better once we're done. All right, let's just think about these lines one at a time. Sheet 2.select. It obviously can't be sheet 2, so we can change that with, we change the reference for sheet 1, or with sheet 2 with what? We change that to S. But now let's ask ourselves, do we really need to do that? What's the active sheet right now? Yeah, we just created it. When you create a sheet, it doesn't create it in the background somewhere. It makes it right in the front. It's already active. We don't need that one. Question? No. Not necessary. Then we selected row 3, column 1. What does your gut tell you? Is there something really critical about that cell being selected? No. No, don't need that either. By the way, when you're creating charts, it is important which cells are selected when you create a chart. Pivot tables, it's not. Okay, let me just kind of isolate this next line. It looks really bad. We're going to make it look a lot better. So, active sheet dot pivot tables. This is the collection. So, pivot tables is the collection of all the pivot tables on the active sheet. We can change active sheet to S, but slow down. I mean, don't get so happy with that. What is this a reference to right up to here? Yeah, this is the pivot. This is that pivot table we just created. Well, earlier we captured a reference to that pivot table, so we can just say PT. So we're going to add a data field. And look at this next one. It's not so obvious because it's split with a line break. But what does this say right here? Active sheet, pivot tables, pivot table 2. That's PT. So we've taken that line that was 2 lines, and we've written that statement that was 2 lines, we reduced it down to 1. We're going to add a data field. So we're going to make a data field out of one of our pivot fields. We have all these are the pivot fields. This is my set of pivot fields right here. I want to take one of these and make it a data field. That's what we're doing here. We were saying add a data field. What's it going to be? Well, it's going to be one of these pivot fields. The one called value. We're going to give it a name. We'll call it sum of value. That's a fine name for it. And what kind of summary is it going to be? Data fields are always summaries. It's going to be a count, sum, an average, whatever. Right here. You just tell it. The Excel sum. It's sum. All right. Let's look at the next one. Let's tackle the next one. Now, we're going to do something with one of our pivot fields. Our label pivot field, all we're going to do is we're going to say, you know what? This is going to be a column field. We're going to make this into a column field. Now, we've got this width and this end width. Why is it doing width, end width? It's changing 2 lines. So it's changing 2 things of this particular object. It turns out this position, if I don't tell it the position, it's going to come in at position 1. Like if there's already something there, and I want it to come into position 1, I got to tell it to come to position 1. But if there's already something there and I bring it in, it's going to come as position 2. If there's nothing there, as the case now, it comes to position 1. So the position is not going to be important, which means I don't need the width. It's just going to be one statement. So let's take a look. I'm going to get rid of this width then. This first part, active sheet, pivot tables, pivot table 2. What is that? That's my PT. So since I'm getting rid of the width, I'm going to just replace all this at once with PT. I'm only worried about sending the orientation. I'll bring that up. And I'll get rid of the position and the end width. So I've gotten rid of that whole if block down to just this one statement.
You need dot to PT and pivot fields.
Oh yeah, PT dot pivot fields. Thank you. And that was my one I set one column field. It was the label column field. Now, these next 3 are my 3 row fields. Row field, row field, row field. State, school, and campus. Same action. We're just going to go through and convert these into 3 separate, just the 3 lines instead of this whole block. Get rid of all of that reference to the pivot table. Replace it with PT. Bring up the orientation. Delete the rest. I'll do that to all three of these. So the macro recorder has recorded this, and it's given me some pretty good code, but it's a lot wordier than it needs to be. Yep.
I have a rookie question.
A rookie question.
So, with and end with, so basically what's being accomplished there is so you don't have to set the object. You're just saying, this is the object that we're talking about, we're going to do this to it. These different things.
That's exactly what it's saying. Let me just say it again.
Yeah.
So what's this whole with end with business? What it says is, with end with says, listen, I'm going to identify some object here. Doesn't matter how I identify it. I could be creating the object. If it's a method that creates the object and then returns a reference to it, I can put the create statement right here and say I'm going to do something with whatever object this evaluates to. And then any statement inside the with end with block that starts with a dot just says, oh, that dot is referring to whatever object is identified here. It's a shorthand notation. It tends to make the lines not as wide, which is nice, but it also tends to add lines as well. And so, yeah, I'm not a fan of the with end with. I'm more of a fan of saying do this, bind an object variable onto the object, and then just use that variable to be a short reference to the object. This can be slightly more efficient. All right, what do you think? Do you think we have to select A25? No selecting necessary. What's this next one doing? So here's where we're collapsing away the school detail. We're saying look at the school and collapse all the detail below it. And so instead of active sheet pivot tables, pivot table 2, that's PT. Show the detail false. The select again we don't need. Again here, pivot table, we're going to move that down to PT. Bring this up onto one line. And so here what we're saying is, these two lines say we're not going to show all the school detail except for the University of Alabama. So set the detail for the schools to false, and then so that sets all of them to false, and then pick a particular one, University of Alabama, and set the detail on that one to true. We're then setting the detail to false on the state. And that should get us set up with the filters that we wanted, so our drilling set up the way we want it. Next, we established we set up one of our fields to be a page field. And so we had a row field, we set a column field, and this is our page field. That's our report year. Same simplification here. PT dot that, set the orientation, get rid of the rest. Similar with the type. We made that a page.
Would we lose anything if we just find and replace all of the...
Could we just do a find and replace with active sheet.pivot table 2, and replace it? The answer is that would get you partway there. The reason it doesn't work all the time, I've gotten rid of them all, but some of these, the lines were broken in the middle of a line break. And your find and replace will miss that one. So, so you're right, it wouldn't be a bad idea to do, but kind of since we're talking through the code, I want to go look at each individual, what we're changing. We're almost done. Yep.
It's kind of where we are right now and a little bit earlier. When we're adding row fields or we're adding page fields, and we're not specifying the order, they just end up in the order that you added them.
Yeah, so that's the question. You notice this position, I'm getting rid of this position. And the answer is, that's right. Here's 3 of them. This one will be in the first position, this will be the second, and this will be the third. They're going in the order that you added. Okay, so again with this one, change the reference to the pivot table down to PT. Set the orientation as a page field. Looks like this one went into position 1. I didn't mean for it to go into position 1. Let me just take a look if that's the case. Oh, I've deleted it, so I can't tell. Never mind. I want the year at the top and then the type as the next one. All right, then I set a couple of the values. I set one of them to be crime. Let's look at this line right here. This one is saying clear all filters. What do you think? Necessary or not necessary? We haven't put any filters on it yet. Brand new, we just really created it. No reason to clear it. I'll get rid of that. Then again, reference to the pivot table, down to PT. We're saying, hey, we are going to set a page. What page are we going to look at? Just the crime. On the type report field, we're going to set it to crime. And then same thing, we don't need to clear the filters for the next one. And we will set the pivot tables, pivot field, report year to 2006. I'll leave those together as a block. So here I'm setting up what the filters at the top will be. Here I'm giving some values to those filters. And our code is way more readable now than it was a short time ago. You can see the whole thing on my one measly little screen here.
What caused it not to work if Play was originally recorded and said it would work?
Oh, the question is, why wouldn't it work if we just ran it again? And the answer is that when we create the sheet, it's going to get a name like Sheet 1, Sheet 2, or Sheet 3, and that name is embedded here in the code. And so it would work again if I deleted the worksheet that was just created, closed the workbook, and open it up again, and that way when it recreates that sheet, it'll create the sheet with the same number. But in this session, once I've created Sheet 1, it's not going to ever create a Sheet 1 again until I close the workbook, open it up again. It'll create Sheet 2, Sheet 3, Sheet 4. If you've ever done something where you've created a lot of sheets, like create a sheet, delete a sheet, create a sheet, some kind of long iterative process, I've seen like sheet number 3,422. Sheet 3,422, just because it just keeps going up. Even though sheet 1's gone, been deleted, it won't recycle that one until it's closed. That's a lot of code to change and expect it still to work. Cross your fingers, and I'm going to push play. It's a miracle. Made my sheet 4 here. Sheet 3 is the prior one that I was recording while I was trying to get it to the right code. That's beautiful. It's all here, configured the way I want. If I expand Alabama, I should see the University of Alabama pre-expanded down here at Huntsville and Tuscaloosa. Just what I was hoping. All right, folks, this code's a little bit daunting. It's new objects to work with and such. But how many of you are looking at this and going, okay, I think I get it. I think this process, not too bad. Yeah. How many of you are going, is this class ever going to get easier? So, yeah, this is a long way from where we began this class, a month and, what is it, not quite 2 months ago, or just a little over 2 months ago. We've come a long way. Able to read this code and feel not too bad about it. It's a lot more readable, and it's working. Now, we still have a problem with this code, and that is each time we run this code, we're creating a pivot cache. Pivot cache.create. Pivot cache.create. That's no good. In fact, that happens. Let's take a look. Let's let us. Hey, camera. Question. I'm going to open up my immediate window, and let's just do this. This workbook. Dot pivot caches. Dot count. Pivot P-I-V-O-T-C. Oh, it's walkbook. It's actually a Chinese restaurant. Right, so right now I've got one pivot cache. You come in here and create. I'm going to run my code again. Should have created a new pivot table. Now I've got 2 pivot caches. Well, let's do this. Let's just see. I'm going to come create one by hand. Just quickly come to crime data, insert, pivot table, okay, put something somewhere. So I just made another pivot table by hand on the same data. Let me count my pivot caches again. I still have 2, so figure that out. All right, so it's smart enough to figure out, I've already got a pivot cache built on this data. It's not going to generate a new pivot cache, but my code here is saying, hey, we've got to create a pivot cache each time. And that's bad. We don't want to create a separate pivot cache on the same data. No reason to maintain 2 pivot caches. So we have to be a little bit smarter about how we're building this pivot cache. Any thoughts on what we should do? Yeah, let's just look at it. So we're going to if then say only execute this if we need to. All right, I'm good with that. Now if what? Let's make a simplifying assumption here. It's not a bad assumption. The assumption is we're only going to have 1 pivot cache in this whole workbook. This pivot cache is for looking at our crime data. Don't be building another pivot cache. Just 1. With a little more work, we can verify that assumption, but right now we're just going to make that assumption. So if this workbook.pivotcaches.count, if the number of pivot caches here is equal to 0, what does that mean? Yeah, there's no pivot caches. We made a great one. Then create the pivot cache. Else, we'll do something else. All right, let me go ahead and delete all of my workbooks that have pivot tables on them. Is that all? Or is there one hiding behind my... What's it? Do you like my picture? Does it show? Okay, so right now I don't have any pivot tables in my workbook. Let me come back here and count the pivot caches. Pivot caches.count, 0. So when I delete the pivot table, in fact, when I delete the last pivot table attached to a pivot cache, Excel is smart enough to go, okay, you got a pivot cache sitting around here with no pivot tables. Clean that thing up. We don't need that. There's a question back here.
How come for the if then on the create pivot table line?
That's a really good question. It might be hard to see from way back there in the back of the room, so I'm going to darken that in for you. It's really up here on the pivot cache. Okay. Yeah, sorry, that was my mistake. Wasn't paying too close attention. So yeah, the questioner in the back says, hey, talking about creating this pivot cache, doesn't the if belong around where you're creating the pivot cache? And the answer is yes. In a moment of mindless stupor, I put it on the wrong statement. So we are trying to decide when to create the pivot cache. Question?
You're making reference to the PC on that, right?
Oh, yeah, that's the next problem. Yeah, that's a problem that we've got to deal with. So here's the point that the next question is bringing up is right here. Let's suppose we already have in fact, I'm going to run this code. It should run just fine. Creates my pivot cache. Now I've got a pivot cache, so if I come and count it, there's 1 pivot cache here. So if I think about this executing, if pivot cache is not count equals 0, is this statement true or false at this point? False. I've got 1 pivot cache. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to try to create the pivot table, and it's going to say pc.createPivotTable. Now, I have not bound the PC variable to anything. So what is PC referring to? PC is an object variable. It's referring to some object. Every object variable has to refer to some object. When I create a string variable, it has a default value. It says zero-length string. When I create a numeric variable, it's a default value. When I create an object variable, it points to a default object. What's the name of that object? Nothing. And so, right now, PC is referring to nothing. Do you think the nothing object has a create pivot table method? It does not. And so if I try to run this code now, I'm going to get to this line, object variable not set, and it's going, yeah, you can't do this. It's saying PC it's not set to anything. It's referring to nothing. You can't just, there's nothing you can call on nothing. There's no object. It's an object. There's no method properties. And so that's the problem. So, that was your question? Yeah. So, when we don't have to create this, we still have to bind our pivot cache onto something. Our pivot cache variable. What are we going to do? That's for the else clause. What should we do right here? Yep.
Well, I would just put this set p the yellow line of code up in the top if statement and then put the same one in the else statement without the PC.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is, okay, if we need a pivot cache, this is the only place we're referring to pivot cache. Over here, we're pivot table and we're home free. So just bring this one up here and then figure out something else here. That would probably be okay, but we can't just say create pivot table without telling it which pivot cache to create it on. Create pivot table is a method of the pivot cache object. It's got to be some pivot cache object. Here's what we're going to do. Remember, the assumption we're making is if there's a pivot cache here, it's the one we want. So all we're going to say is, listen, if there's no pivot caches, if the count is 0, make a pivot cache. Otherwise, there's got to be at least one. Let's just bind our pivot cache onto that first, our pivot cache variable onto the first pivot cache object. So we're going to set PC equal to, well, we're using this workbook. We probably should be consistent. I'm going to use this. It would work just fine the way we had it, but I'm going to put this workbook for all of these. The difference between an active workbook and this workbook? Active workbooks, whatever the active workbook is. This workbook is the workbook that contains the code that's currently running. We expect it to be the same for this particular application. Okay, so now we are either going to create a new pivot cache and bind PC onto it, or we're going to bind PC onto the first pivot cache in the collection. From there, it should be able to run okay. I'm just going to drag this yellow line back up to my if statement so we can watch it go through. F8, it skips by the if, comes into the else, and now it should be able to execute that line just fine. I'll hit F5 to finish running, and now it will continue along. So I now have two pivot tables, one on sheet 7, one on sheet 8, identical to each other. If I ask for the count, now the count is only 1. So instead of duplicating the pivot cache, it finds the existing pivot cache, uses that to build the next pivot table. Questions? Yes?
What's the problem again with having multiple pivot caches?
The question is, what's the problem with having multiple pivot caches? Let's think about what the pivot cache is. So if I look at the data over here that I'm working with, it's a lot of data. It's like 23,000 rows of data. Pivot cache is a copy of that data in a format that's going to be easy to manipulate by the pivot table object. It's attached to a pivot cache. Now that data might be compressed in a way that it's not as much, it takes as much space as it does here on the worksheet. That's quite a bit of data. And what do you think? Is this a large pivot table? 23,000 rows, large pivot table?
Yeah.
No, tiny. It could be millions of rows. Pretty large. We've got millions. Well, not here. Well, not if it's the data's in Excel, because we can only go to 1.04 million. But it could if it's coming from a database. So I've got the pivot cache as a copy of that data in a form that it can be manipulated by the pivot table. If I create another pivot cache, I'm using up twice the resources for manipulating the data that I need to.
So it could still work, but just
It would work fine.
Okay.
It would, in fact, as long as I had the memory on my computer, it would work fine. But it's using extra memory, and in this case, not like we're declaring a variable as a long when it should have been a byte. Oh no, this is a substantial amount of memory that we're allocating here. So we want to be careful that we're managing our pivot cache as well. Other questions? Yes.
So, if the pivot cache is 0, like when would it not be 0?
So the question is, when would if the pivot cache count be at something other than 0?
Yeah. Like, do workbooks come with pivot caches?
The question is, do the workbooks come with a pivot cache built in? And the answer is no. A pivot cache gets created when I create a pivot table.
Right. So why do you write them?
Why what?
So why would you write that line?
This right here?
Yeah.
So if the pivot cache count is 0, the pivot cache count will be 0 as soon as, because the other thing it does is that if I delete all the pivot tables attached to a pivot cache, it throws away the pivot cache as well. So right now there's one pivot cache that supports these two pivot tables. If I right-click and delete these, Excel now realizes all the pivot tables that were referring to that one pivot cache are now gone. That pivot cache is old news. There's no reason to keep that around. And it has deleted that pivot cache. If I come back here now and count my pivot caches, it says there are none right here.
Okay.
So in the situation where there's no pivot caches, I got to tell it, go build a pivot cache. There's already a pivot cache here. I'm going to say, use that pivot cache, build the pivot table on it.
So this macro obviously is unique to this data set.
This macro is unique to this data set. Yes, absolutely, because I'm looking at specific columns, state, campus, school. I'm manipulating these to manipulate this particular.
We're telling it if it's not 0, then grab this pivot cache and build this pivot table.
That's right. If there are no pivot caches, we've got to have a pivot cache, build it, and then build a pivot table on it.
But if there is a pivot
cache,
on this,
use it. And we're saying, and the only difference here is we've got to set our pivot cache variable equal to something. In this case, we'll make a new pivot cache. In this case, we'll bind it onto an existing pivot cache, and then we're going to use the pivot cache to build the pivot table. Okay, last thing I'd like to do here is just, as an exercise, let's work through what it would mean to say, you know what, I don't want to have just one pivot table. Oops, let me run this again so I can have a pivot table to look at. I don't want just one pivot table here. I would like to have, this one here that shows about the crime, and I want a separate pivot table over here, say in column L, that shows enrollment numbers. I want to see enrollment numbers here by state, and then I want to see crime here by state. We can record ourselves doing this, but I think we've got all the components we need to do that right here in the code. So let's just take a look and see what we would need to do. All right, we're going to need a new pivot table, so we'll for sure need this create pivot table statement. In fact, what I may do is just copy this whole block, and then we'll delete and change what we don't need. So I've copied that. I'm down here at the very bottom, just before end sub. I'm putting a comment here, second pivot table, and I'll paste. So I've just copied the block from where we're creating it. Once I've figured out which pivot cache I'm working with, that's the pivot cache I'm going to use. I don't need the logic for the pivot cache again. So starting with where I create the pivot table, I've copied that code down, and we'll think about what do we have to do. So first thing is, I don't want to set it in A3. What's my destination going to be? L3. All right, and I'm going to put a pivot table. I still want the sum of the values. You want the sum of the value, enrollment. Yeah, sum of enrollment's not so handy. Let's go ahead and leave it though that. So we'll put sum of enrollment, that's fine. Now, what do I want for my column labels? Probably want year again. Let's see. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Let's see. Makes sense? Yeah, let me put year here, so that will be report year. I'm going to copy that to make sure I've got it spelled right. So my column, setting my column field, is going to be report year. Setting my state, or my row to be state. I don't want to drill down in this case, I just want it to be state, so I'll get rid of these other ones here. I don't want to worry about any collapsing, so we'll get all this business about showing the detail out of here. The only thing I want for my, I don't want report year in my, as a page header. I just want the type, and so I don't need to set the report year. And instead of crime, I want this to be information. That should, because information, those numbers are either information, which is enrollment, or they're crime, which is all the different crimes. So now, with a few more lines of code, I'm able to say, you know what, I want to set up a secondary pivot table right here on this page, using the same pivot cache. We're going to sum the values only for the information, the type information, which will be enrollments, show it by year and by state. So if I run that now, that should give me a second pivot table here that's, again, can articulate. The user can work with this one just the same as they would the other one. So I've got my same one here, and that's that code, folks. Frankly, that code to do that is not too bad. Build a pivot table, set column, row, filter. We're good to go. The key here is understanding these two things, pivot cache and pivot table, how they work together. Questions? All right. If there's nothing else, we'll dismiss class. Class dismissed.